Representative Carney, for people who don't know, can you give us an overview of charter schools and why you feel they're needed here in Kentucky?
Well, first, Jacqueline, thanks for the opportunity to try to explain House Bill 520. I believe we need public charters in Kentucky to help bring an opportunity to students that are looking for a different model to learn. I believe that most of our students will be able to get a quality education in a traditional public school, but we have many students, after 20 years of educating folks that I've been involved in, one size doesn't fit all. And I believe that public charter schools will bring that opportunity to many students to find a different niche, something that personalized for their learning, and I think that's what they have the chance to bring to Kentucky.
With charter schools, everything has to do with the enacting legislation. State to state, they're different because the legislation is different. And in Kentucky, if this passes, this will be our model for charter schools. So what is in House Bill 520 and what will charter schools look like in Kentucky?
Well, first off, again, like you said, it varies from state to state, the legislation. There's been 43 other states that have passed legislation, so hopefully we'll become the 44th. And the good thing there is we've got a lot of places to look at. So over 25 years of experience to look at what works and what doesn't. And House Bill 520, I think, has brought together some things that have been best practices from all over the country and will basically look like many models from surrounding states. But the key part, I guess, for many folks is who is the authorizer. And in this bill, the authorizer would be the local school district with a very strong appeals process to the Kentucky State School Board. And I think that's an important note for everyone to realize that, and everything would go through, including the funding, basically would be sent through the local school district if a charter were, for example, authorized here in Franklin County. That money would run through the Franklin County school system to them. And the funding's a big question that many people ask. And the funding would based capital outlay and transportation funds would stay within the Franklin County School District, and then there would be a 3% processing fee. Then all other funds, though, would go basically with the child. It's important to note, for far too long in public education, we've always talked about the money being the schools, et cetera. That money is basically belongs to the child. And so that's how the funding mechanism would work.
Now, how long do you think it would take to get a charter school up and running in Kentucky after this bill is passed?
I think a reasonable time frame may well be possibly 2018-19. I think it would take a little while to make sure everything's implemented on the ground to get that started. It'll take a while to go through the application process for the department to set up some things that they would need to do to make sure that all the guidelines are in place. So I think that's a reasonable time frame.
And who gets to attend these schools? You know, we talk about students getting a different chance to learn. And this bill does set up where they can go anywhere across the state. It doesn't just have to be a pilot project in one county or another. Anywhere can set up a pilot or a charter school. But who would be attending these schools?
Any student would be eligible. Any student that would be eligible for any public school basically would be eligible for a public charter school. Again, we have language in the bill that basically try to put some emphasis on students with special needs or free and reduced lunch students, but any child would be eligible. Again, the goal is to basically provide personalized learning opportunities for folks that necessarily feel like they just need a different opportunity. Like you said, though, this bill, it is a statewide bill. There are no caps in this bill, so I feel like that's a strong part of it, but any student would be eligible.
Now, what kind of flexibility are teachers given in this bill, and what kind of new opportunities could they have because of it?
Well, hopefully we think it could actually create more jobs too for people in the education profession. They would be given in the classroom, I think, a lot of flexibility to be creative, be innovative. They would have to have the same certification that any other teacher would have. We have language in the bill that basically would give them a 2-year time frame where if you wanted to go see if it worked for you as a teacher in a public charter, that if you were leaving Franklin County District to go teach somewhere else, you would have a 2-year window where you wouldn't necessarily be guaranteed your job back, but you could come back on the same level, years experience status. So we're trying to protect teachers in that regard. But the biggest thing for teachers, I think, is just that opportunity to be free and more innovative in the classroom, less regulatory burdens and some things that you face in the regular classroom. So I think that's something that would be a strong appeal to teachers.
Now, we touched on the funding a little bit, but what do you say to people who say that charter schools take money away from traditional public schools?
And that's a question I get a lot, and I understand that question. Again, I'm a 20-year traditional public school educator, and I believe that traditional public schools will always educate the vast majority of our students and do a great job of doing that. But we have a large population of our students all across the Commonwealth that need another opportunity, something that fits them better. And again, it's the child's money. It's not the school district's money. And we need to make sure that education's funded properly at all levels. But I think we've done the best we can in trying to protect that too, by making sure that the money does go through the local school district, providing that capital outlay and transportation funds stay in that local school district, and a 3% processing fee. So I think we've reached a good point that everyone could be successful. But I think the key point is, again, that money is the child's and parents' money.
Now, what type of standards will the charter schools be held to? You know, that's a question that comes up a lot in this debate, is are they going to be held to the same standards as traditional public schools?
Well, as far as state accountability, they'll be held to the same standards that any other public school student would be. Now, they'll actually be held to a higher standard depending on what's in the contract or the charter. That's why they're named charter, because of that contract. But in terms of the state accountability, which is what many people are concerned about, it'll be the same. They'll have to take the same accountability measures that any other student takes. We want to make sure that everybody's on the same playing field. Again, I keep stressing, I'm a public educator. I don't want anybody to have any hurdle that somebody else doesn't have to climb. We want it to be comparing apples to apples at the end of the year and seeing if those measurements are accurate. So it's the same state accountability testing that any other student would take. And again, let me stress, they'll be frankly held to a higher standard within their own school because of what's in the charter.
Now, I've heard some confusion from people about what's the difference between a charter school and a private school. So now we've talked about the difference between a traditional public and a charter, but what's the difference between private and charter?
And again, thanks for asking that question, because many people think they are private schools. There's a huge difference, obviously. Private schools funded by private funds, et cetera, tuition. Public charter schools are basically schools, again, that are funded by public funds. It basically is really no different than what schools we have now, other than granting autonomy, much more flexibility and regulations through a contract that is basically worked out in agreement through the authorizer, and that flexibility. I work for Taylor County School District, which is a district of innovation. And some folks are going to say, well, why don't we just make them all that? I don't think that we have the mechanisms or the staff to get through all the bureaucracy to do that. But we have some of that flexibility, and I've seen it work. And so I think that that's key, and that is much different than a private school. Again, that you're trading that autonomy and that flexibility away from a lot of these regulations. And but make no mistake, they are not private schools.
Now, the main goal of a charter school bill like this one is to help children who are in currently low-performing areas, usually, get a better education, or one that works for them. So overall, what does a charter offer that gives it the ability to give a child a better education opportunity?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that I've seen in research shows a lot of the wraparound services. That many of these charter schools or public charters will start maybe much earlier in the day and go much later into the evening. Oftentimes having Saturday school. They seem to be much smaller schools in general, which I think brings a huge sense of community, where you have more buy-in. Parents tend to be much more engaged, even for students who may come from areas where you traditionally may not have. And well, that's every district where parent engagement's maybe not as much as we would like, whether it's traditional public school or what. And you tend to have much more parent buy-in. For example, I visited one school recently in Indianapolis that third grade class that every parent showed up for the parent-teacher conference. And I would say you'd be hard-pressed to go find any public school in Kentucky that's happened. Now, they acknowledged they basically had to keep calling, but that's kind of the dedication you see in the public charter schools. I think because of that community sense, and realize that they have that strong accountability over their head. You know, if they don't meet their goals, you know, they can be shut down or closed, and that's one thing I think is a huge advantage over our traditional public schools. While we're trying hard to do the job, frankly, if we don't meet our goals, we may have a negative article in the newspaper or not, but you don't have that risk of being shut down. So some people seem to put a lot more energy into making sure they get the job done.
We talked about the difference between a public charter school and a private school, and there are a lot of other misconceptions out there about charter schools. What are some that you hear a lot and that you'd want to address?
Well, actually, you've covered a lot of them. A big one is the private school, that issue, funding situations, cherry picking students, and we're trying to put into the legislation to make sure that, I feel like, again, if the local school district is the authorizer for a certain area, the demographics are pretty much going to match that community. So hopefully, you know, that we can get rid of the cherry picking situation. That's one I hear. You know, again, it'll be a lottery based drawing if there's more people applying for the school than eligible slots. So we're trying to get around that. But cherry picking, let's see, what else have I heard out there? Private school, money makers, for profits. We were trying to limit that language. You know, I think there's just a lot of miscommunication out there. At the end of the day, these schools are public schools for our children to get the best education that they possibly could receive. One that necessarily, like I've said, they feel like they may not be able to get in a traditional school. This is not going to be for every student, but if we can reach just 5,000 students this way, that's 5,000 lives that are changed forever, and it's worth it for me. My own son, even though both sons have gone to traditional public schools, but my oldest son got the chance to go to the Gatton Academy. Some say it's a charter. Well, it's not a charter, but it was a school choice that was specialized for his ability and his need. And that's one of the reasons that's convinced me to get on this movement, to allow children to have the same chance that my kids had, even though they went the traditional path other than 2 years for Chase at the Gatton Academy, so they can find what best fits their need, just like my son had the chance to do. And I want every family to have that same opportunity.